As the brutal winter of 1945 loomed over Central Europe, the city of Berlin, the heart of Nazi Germany, stood as a bastion of political power and ideological conviction. The Soviet forces, fresh from their relentless march westward, were poised to deliver a final blow to the crumbling Third Reich. This advance, however, was not merely a tactical maneuver across a battlefield. It transformed into an intricate dance of death within the urban landscape itself, where every street corner offered limited visibility. Familiar structures became fortified positions, and the air reverberated with the sounds of artillery and the cries of despair. With a force of over 2 million soldiers, equipped with artillery, tanks, and air cover from the Red Air Force, the Soviets launched their assault on April 16, 1945, aiming to encircle and annihilate the beleaguered defenders of Berlin. The initial phases of the assault saw the deployment of overwhelming firepower. Soviet artillery units, numbering in the hundreds, established a formidable barrage that rained incessant shells upon the German fortifications, targeting key military structures and the infrastructure crucial for the defense of the city. They aimed to demolish the spirit and capabilities of the enemy before the infantry advanced. The ferocity of the bombardment quickly turned Berlin into a hellscape. The sky was choked with smoke, and the ground shuddered under the weight of destruction. Such an overwhelming show of force was aimed not only at weakening the physical defenses, but also at instilling terror in the hearts of both civilians and defenders alike. However, the tenacious German forces, bolstered by well-entrenched positions and fortified buildings, were prepared to contest every meter, utilize the urban terrain to their advantage. In conjunction with the artillery, Soviet tanks spearheaded the assault, Model T-34s leading the vanguard. Their sloped armor and high-velocity guns made them formidable opponents, capable of penetrating the makeshift defenses established by the Germans. Nonetheless, the German forces deployed a complex web of obstacles, including anti-tank ditches, barricades, and improvised roadblocks, further complicating the Soviet advance. The crammed streets of Berlin, once bustling with life, quickly became a labyrinth of war, where infantry clashes erupted in savage encounters. Within this chaotic environment, the Germans effectively utilized their clandestine knowledge of the city's layout, setting ambushes and utilizing the ruins of bombed-out buildings as firing positions. As the days progressed into the bloody street battles, the grim reality of urban warfare unfolded. The Soviets faced significant challenges as they sought to take individual neighborhoods, with house-to-house fighting often defined by alarmingly close quarters. The soldiers, many of whom were conditioned to the open-field warfare of the Eastern Front, were required to adapt their combat strategies, embracing the chaos that came with urban skirmishes. Street fighting devolved into harrowing battlegrounds where tactical formations dissipated into the cacophony of fighting, with riflemen employing submachine guns and improvised explosives becoming standard operating procedure. Soviet commanders implemented a strategy by encircling entire blocks and cutting off escape routes, forcefully isolating the enemy, but each advance was met with ferocious resistance. In stark contrast, the defenders, comprised of a patchwork of battle-hardened veterans and hastily conscripted youngsters, displayed a courageous tenacity. Perhaps one of the most tragic elements of these battles was the remarkable human resolve displayed amidst the chaos. Adolescents, drafted in the waning days of the war, fought with a combination of desperation and fervor, buoyed by the propagandistic fervor instilled by their leaders. For many, this was not merely a battle for a city, but a desperate stand for their homeland, a fight intertwined with nationalism, loyalty, and fear of the consequences that could follow defeat. Simultaneously, the civilian population bore an unspeakable brunt of the conflict. From the outset, the Soviet advance threatened the very fabric of everyday life, as residents, trapped within their homes, lived under the constant barrage of gunfire. Sheltering in basements and crumbling alcoves, they became unwitting captives in a war that displaced them, turning familiar streets into grisly reminders of loss. A dark turn of strategy emerged. With the encirclement closing in around the city, the Soviets often used the civilians as a form of psychological warfare against the beleaguered defenders. As German forces sought to protect their populace, they found themselves increasingly unwilling to withdraw, prioritizing the safety of civilians over military pragmatism, inadvertently leading to further casualties. By the beginning of May, the complexity of warfare in Berlin reached a peak, compounded by the deteriorating humanitarian conditions. The streets were strewn with debris, fractured buildings leaned precariously, and the acrid stench of smoke and blood filled the air. The fighting intensified as Soviet troops employed encirclement tactics, isolating German defenders in small pockets throughout the city. House by house, block by block, the Soviets began to suffocate their opponents, thwarting any attempts at organized resistance. Compellingly, the defenders devised a series of makeshift bunkers and fortified structures, creating a network of resistance reminiscent of the wartime defiance seen during the siege of Stalingrad. Cadenza of combat echoing through the city. The fragile equilibrium between immense suffering and fierce determination created an atmosphere fraught with dread, yet undeniably reflective of the human spirit under duress. Amidst escalating assaults, the population's suffering became increasingly visible. Food and water quickly dwindled, forcing civilians to venture into the open against their compatriots. Women and children risked their lives to gather necessities, blurring the lines of combatants and non-combatants. Tragedy struck as both die-hard German defenders and desperate civilians fell victim to the relentless artillery bombardments, prompting profound moments of despair among the onlookers. Altered dramatically by the conflict, they were caught in an ever-expanding landscape of destruction, as the very identity of their city teetered on the brink of irreversible change. As the sun set over Berlin in early May, the campaign against the German defenders grasped its final stages. The Red Army had amassed sufficient support and resources to mount an all-out offensive, embodying a culmination of tactical acumen, sheer force, and the tragic human cost of ensuring victory. Buildings that once served as landmarks of culture and history transformed into tombs of resistance, underscoring the profound impact of war on both the urban landscape and human lives caught in the tempest of conflict. In those defining moments where loyalty intersected with grief and valor waged a battle against hopelessness, the soldiers trudged forward into an uncertain future, forever marked by the trials faced in the streets of Berlin. The final chapters of this urban battlefield would not only determine the fate of a city, but would etch the collective trauma of a war into the very foundation of a nation struggling to emerge from the shadows of tyranny. As the bitter clash for the heart of Berlin continued, the ferocity of the conflict escalated, spawning street battles that systematically transformed every urban corner into a theater of war. The Red Army's command employed meticulously orchestrated strategies, leveraging overwhelming numbers and firepower against the scattered remnants of German defenders. Battalions advanced with a singular focus, each soldier burdened not only with the weight of their arms, but also the spirit of an entire nation yearning for liberation from the crushing grip of the Nazi regime. Tactics became paramount. With the main thrust directed along major thoroughfares, Soviet commanders aimed to disrupt German supply lines and encircle strongholds using a multi-pronged approach. The Red Army effectively utilized the urban terrain to their advantage. Buildings and wreckage served as makeshift cover while snipers were strategically positioned to take out key German officers, creating chaos within the ranks of the Wehrmacht as orders often became muddied by the din of small arms fire and the shrapnel of artillery. Soviet tank units advanced under the heavy covering fire of their artillery brigades, utilizing the destruction of urban structures to crush any defenders caught in the open. The famed T-34, with its sloped armor and robust 76.2mm gun, played a crucial role in these engagements. Its ability to traverse the wreckage of a city poised for combat allowed the Soviets to maintain pressure, forcing German defenders to either commit heavily to their defenses or risk being overrun. Yet, within this maelstrom of steel and gunpowder, the human element remained as important as tactics and firepower. The stoicism of the Soviet troops, many of whom had already endured unimaginable hardships on the Eastern Front, presented a stark contrast to the condition of the German forces, who were grappling with the widespread disillusionment that came from years of devastating conflict. The Wehrmacht, often lauded for its discipline and effectiveness, found itself increasingly crumbling under the relentless Red Army onslaught. Morale dwindled, exacerbated by the knowledge that defeat would not only mean destruction, but the potential for reckoning against a populace that had suffered under oppressive regimes for far too long. On the city's streets, desperation manifested into acts of incredible bravery and harrowing tragedy. Civilians inadvertently ensnared in the battle flourished a heroic resistance, offering limited aid to both soldiers and each other in the face of overwhelming odds. Women stitched together critical supplies with makeshift ingenuity, while children scavenged abandoned rubble for food, an act that underscored the blurring of lines between soldier and civilian. Personal narratives emerged from these ruins, where every quiet moment rippled with tension. Mothers shielded their children while men faced the oncoming tide of soldiers, with a determination born from sorrow and anger, haunted by the ruins of their former lives. As buildings crumbled, so too did the final grasp on the past. Every explosion heralded the demise of historical landmarks, homes, and memories. Within this anguished backdrop, Soviet intelligence played a vital role in shaping the course of the offensive. Various forms of reconnaissance, street by street and house by house, enabled commanders to map out the flow of German defenses, identifying critical points of vulnerability. This intelligence allowed commanders to divert forces where needed, crafting cycles of assault that bewildered their adversaries, leaving them reeling as Soviet units fastened onto critical approaches. Each successful penetration into the heart of the German line fueled the ravenous hunger for revenge amongst Soviet soldiers, many of whom were driven by the collective memories of their fallen comrades at the hands of a brutal regime. The urban battlefield, however, was not without its risks. Clashes often devolved into brutal close-quarters combat, with soldiers forced to engage in hand-to-hand struggle within the ruins of buildings laden with debris from previous attacks. Grenades, rifles, and sometimes just fists became weapons of choice in the maelstrom of chaos. Combatants had to remain attuned not only to their enemies, but also to the civilians who lurked amidst the shadows, individuals struggling to survive, with grief propelling them into the fray. Each floor taken became a milestone, layered with stories of heroism and despair, while the sound of sobbing echoed hauntingly amidst the gunfire, a grim reminder of the price of war. As May 1st dawned, a significant symbol in both Soviet and German history, marking the triumph of labor and resilience, the tension reached a peak. Soviet forces advanced on the Reichstag and the Führerbunker, the epicenter of Nazi power. House-to-house fighting ensued, with the defenders utilizing improvised defensive measures, creating traps using unexploded ordnance and barricades fashioned from shattered concrete. Yet, with each passing hour, the will of the German defenders waned, as does the very fabric of the Nazi regime, which had once promised dominance. The echoes of distant artillery merged with the rattle of machine gun fire, creating a symphony of destruction that could only end in tears. The wounding irony echoed through the hearts of many. For the Soviet troops, the conquest of Berlin was not merely a mission of strategic victory. It was deeply personal, entwined with the stories of comrades who had made the ultimate sacrifice in valorous defiance of tyranny. The emotional burdens weighed heavily as they navigated the smoke-filled corridors of their own memories and losses, fueling a fierce commitment to ensure that such atrocities would never again proliferate in the world. This intrinsic motivation propelled them through the streets, a poignant mixture of hatred for the oppressor and an unyielding resolve to liberate their fellow human beings. As Berlin crumbled further under the onslaught, the truth emerged. The impact on countless lives would be irreparable. Each pile of rubble symbolized not just collateral damage, but the collapse of families, of livelihoods, and of a city steeped in history whose wounds would take generations to heal. Civilians caught in the crossfire carried with them an indelible burden of trauma. The psychological scars from the bombardment and chaos would predominate their memories long after the dust settled. In this relentless struggle, the true cost of war unveiled its face. trials that no strategy could adequately prepare soldiers for. In the waning moments of intense urban combat, the streets bore silent testimony to both the ferocity of human conflict and the enduring will of those who strive to endure. The battle for Berlin became not just a fight for territory, but for the essence of humanity itself, urging the world to remember that amidst the destruction lay the potential for rebirth. As we reflect upon these harrowing yet transformative moments in history, we invite you to delve deeper into the themes of sacrifice, resilience, and the true price of freedom. Engage with us as we continue to explore the intricate tapestry of war, humanity, and the indomitable spirit of survival that defines our shared past. Subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments, for it is through dialogue that we come to understand the enduring legacies of our history. As the relentless advance of Soviet forces pushed deeper into the heart of Berlin, the strategic calculus of the Red Army began to shift. The urban landscape posed formidable challenges, compelling commanders to adapt their tactics to engage effectively in a city structured for defense, where every corner could conceal enemy combatants ready to inflict deadly fire. The battle for the German capital was no longer one of grand maneuvers across open fields, but transformed into a brutal and intimate contest, fought within the confines of bombed-out buildings, narrow streets, and underground shelters. The Soviets, spurred by a desire for vengeance and completion of their mission, had to confront both the resolve of the German defenders, who were bolstered by their own hubris and desperation to protect the final bastion of the Reich, and the civilian population that found themselves entrapped in this catastrophic theater of war. The tactical doctrine adopted by the Soviet commanders emphasized the use of combined arms to render a swift, overwhelming force against the entrenched defenders. Armored units, complemented by infantry brigades, were directed to execute assaults at critical points, with the objective of creating breaches in the defensive lines. The use of T-34 tanks, revered for their design and robustness, proved essential in quickly overcoming barricades and demolishing key defensive positions. But they also faced extreme risks in the urban battlefield laden with Panzerfausts and other anti-tank weapons deployed by German infantry. The Soviets implemented techniques of rapid movement followed by the establishment of secure strongholds to fortify captured areas, creating a foothold from which to launch subsequent attacks and press on despite the best efforts of enemy snipers and machine gun nests. Urban warfare requires a highly synchronized approach. Soviet plans hinged upon meticulous coordination between infantry and armored divisions. Units were deployed in waves, often in synchronization with artillery barrages that targeted suspected enemy strongholds. However, the challenges inherent in this mechanized onslaught were exacerbated by the chaotic nature of urban warfare, where muddled lines of communication and hastily improvised tactics frequently led to friendly fire incidents. For instance, the assault on the Reichstag, a towering symbol of Nazi power, was marked by both a relentless push and intense confusion. Soviet leaders were compelled to rethink their strategies on the fly, wrestling with the logistical strain of providing the necessary supplies and munitions to sustain the protracted assault. With the backdrop of destruction extending as far as the eye could see, the human cost of the battle weighed heavily on the soldiers involved. Each street claimed lives, not solely from the enemy's fire, but also from the toll of exhaustion, hunger, and the omnipresent specter of artillery bombardment that controlled the skies over Berlin. Soldiers found themselves pushing through the remnants of what once were homes, each room turned into a trench of fortification or a grave. The emotional turmoil of advancing through areas marked by civilian casualties only strengthened their resolve as they were confronted with the consequences of war. Ruined lives and dreams consigned to rubble. The specter of fallen comrades further spurred troops into the fray, bolstered by the grim fugue of survival, a visceral drive fed by a complex blend of rage, sorrow, and a desire for retribution against those deemed responsible for the war. As the Soviet forces battled their way toward the center of Berlin, they faced another layer of tactical complexity: the integration of local partisans, who held a fierce animosity toward the Nazi regime. In many instances, these civilians transformed into an impromptu military force, engaging in sabotage and intelligence gathering that would offer the Red Army critical insight into enemy positions. Yet with this dynamic came risks of its own, as not all civilians welcomed the Soviet advance. Many harbored fears of retribution, leading to volatile collaborations that often left soldiers uncertain of which civilians might be allies or adversaries. The fine line traversed between liberation and occupation became increasingly blurred as the Red Army advanced. Regrettably, instances of brutality emerged on the part of some Soviet soldiers, who took vengeance upon civilians for perceived past complicity. Such actions would eventually resonate with historical consequences, casting long shadows over the narrative of liberation. Meanwhile, the German High Command, under the delusion of an ultimate victory, faced mounting frustration and pressure as they scrambled to patch together a defense amidst a collapsing structure of command. The strategic retreat of seasoned troops and the integration of poorly trained Volkssturm fighters, composed of elderly men and adolescent boys, only compounded the confusion faced by the German commanders. They often miscalculated the Red Army's capabilities, underestimating their resolve and ability to operate under extreme conditions. As waves of assaults pressed forward, the defensive front buckled under relentless pressure, leading to a swift unraveling of cohesion among German units. By May of 1945, final assaults transformed into a hellish spectacle of combat, defined by grim encounters and staggering casualties on both sides. The fall of the Reichstag became a notorious emblem of this urban warfare, an event marked by the chaotic struggle for control, as Soviet soldiers fought through the final pocket of fierce German resistance. As they stormed the building, they encountered entrenched defenders deployed throughout various floors, each well prepared for a bitter defense. The violence erupted in close quarters fighting, a stark reminder of the innate brutality of war, as insights into tactics and strategies devolved into an all-consuming battle for survival. Through dramatic exchanges of fire and intense hand-to-hand combat, the soldiers moved floor by floor, ultimately culminating in a violent confrontation that would echo through history, a palpable testament to both the resilience and desperation emblematic of the fight for Berlin. The outcome resulted not merely in a change of geographic control, but in the profound transformation of societal norms as Berlin fell to the Soviets. The aftermath of such urban conflict would be long-lasting, permanently altering the landscape of Europe and marking the onset of the Cold War. The tremendous human cost, a cacophony of losses and deep psychological scars, underscored the bitter truth of these hard-fought victories. Soldiers returned home bearing not only the marks of their physical battles, but the indelible shadows of their experiences, whispering tales of horrors that transcended the battlefield. Thus, Berlin transformed from a city synonymous with both power and oppression to a poignant symbol of the destructive capacity of mankind, a city forever marked by the echoes of war. In the quiet aftermath of conflict, the narrative of the soldier emerged as one of survival against insurmountable odds, intertwined with themes of remembrance and mourning for the lost. As the initial waves of the Soviet offensive crashed against the remnants of the German defenses, the battlefield in Berlin increasingly morphed into a twisted theater of urban warfare. The city, already battered by years of conflict, now bore witness to a final, savage struggle. The German High Command had anticipated a prolonged defense. Remnants of their forces included battle-hardened soldiers, remnants of the Wehrmacht, and volunteers who had once believed in the Third Reich. They occupied makeshift fortifications, transforming buildings into veritable bastions of resistance. Each street corner became a strategic point to be contested, each block a theater in which lives would be snuffed out in an instant. The buildings themselves, architectural marvels once admired for their grandeur, now became implements of war, crumbling under the weight of artillery and the relentless battering of small arms fire. The Soviets, under the command of General Georgy Zhukov and Marshal Ivan Konev, were not merely reliant on brute force. Their strategies incorporated the concentrated firepower of artillery, the overwhelming numbers of infantry, and the ruthless application of armored units to breach German strongholds. Tank units, such as the fearsome T-34, were deployed to capitalize on the disarray caused by their bombardments. These tanks moved through the ruined streets with stark precision, supporting infantry assaults and crushing any semblance of organized resistance. The Soviet military doctrine emphasized rapid movement and encirclement, a tactic initially employed on the vast expanses of the Eastern Front, but now reinforced by a pummeling advance into the heart of the German capital. The brutal nature of urban combat forced the once effective strategies into a grim adaptation, where advancing forces had to weave through the debris of buildings and manage sudden ambushes from sniper fire or machine gun nests hidden within the wreckage. In the early stages of the assault, the Soviets faced unyielding resistance at points like the Tiergarten and the Luftwaffe headquarters, where German soldiers dug in with a resolve fueled by desperation and a fearful loyalty to their homeland. Infantry units engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse, often finding themselves in mere meters apart, firing regular bursts of gunfire through windows and down alleyways. The Soviets quickly learned the value of combined arms. They coordinated their assaults with artillery barrages that would soften resistance before infantry rushed in to exploit any weakness. Yet amid this chaotic ballet of thunderous explosions and gunfire, each advancing soldier faced the palpable dread of the unknown. The shifting streets of Berlin concealed threats and traps, which could claim their lives with little warning. As the combat intensified, the psychological toll on both sides became increasingly evident. The trauma of constant bombardment, the sight of fallen comrades, and the fatal consequences of split-second decisions weighed heavily on the soldiers' minds, creating an atmosphere of pervasive dread, interspersed with fleeting moments of adrenaline. Both Soviet and German soldiers found themselves bonded by the shared horror of urban battle, their faces often grimy, streaked with soot, blood, and sweat, reflecting their collective struggle for survival. The German fighters, determined to maintain even a glimmer of hope, fought valiantly, extracting every ounce of courage possible. For many, the stakes transcended mere military defeat. They perceived the survival of Germany itself resting upon their fragile shoulders. Consequently, as Soviets pressed forward, they encountered fierce resistance that often devolved into a nightmarish melee. The Soviet troops, accustomed to operations in open settings, now grappled with harrowing close-quarters combat. Streets transformed into gauntlets of death, where grenades exploded with hateful precision, and the chaos of war rendered the distinction between ally and adversary agonizingly ambiguous. Combatants were forced to rely on instinct and raw emotion as they engaged in hand-to-hand encounters with rifles, bayonets, and even improvised weapons, each clash fraught with desperation. The urban landscape, cluttered with debris and the remnants of civilian life, worsened the scenario. The danger of buildings collapsing under bombardment only intensified the sense of impending doom. The character of warfare shifted dramatically. Individual encounters often determined not just the fate of a soldier, but the control of entire neighborhoods. Command decisions became a matter of life and death, as generals adjusted tactics in real time amidst the gnashing teeth of battle. The Soviets faced the challenge of managing their supply lines, which had to contend with the debris-choked paths of once bustling boulevards now unrecognizable. Logistics became a daily struggle highlighted by the need for constant ammunition replenishment, medical supplies, and fresh troops to maintain the momentum. The courage shown by the Red Army soldiers did not go unnoticed. Orders for assaults were often followed by mass volleys of artillery to maintain pressure and cover the advancing units. Tactical units were organized into smaller teams to enhance mobility within the urban sprawl, leveraging favorable street positions and clearing buildings with surgical precision. Despite these tactical innovations, losses mounted grotesquely. For every inch of territory conquered, the Soviets endured the heavy price of life and limb. The wounded, both soldier and civilian, filled makeshift hospitals and shelters as medical personnel labored tirelessly amidst the chaos. The grim specter of mortality loomed large as estimate after chilling estimate arrived, a grim testament to the brutality of such urban warfare. With every passing hour, the concept of victory began to feel like a bitter après-coup. Hard won, yet marred with the sacrifice of thousands. Children's toys lay abandoned in the rubble, while the echoes of civilian screams resonated through desolated streets, an unwanted reminder of the innocents caught in this tumultuous maelstrom. In this titanic struggle, every day was a delicate balance between the desire for victory and the toll it took on humanity. As the dawn broke over Berlin, shadows of smoke mingled with rays of sunlight, illuminating the hollow shells of grand buildings reduced to mere echoes of their former glory. Concrete evidence of the brutal confrontation emerged around every corner. The remnants of shattered lives told a story of resilience, but also of despair. The streets bore silent witness to the magnitude of the conflict, preserving the memories of battles fought and lives lost. With each passing hour, the city turned, slowly succumbing to the inevitability of change. Voices of the past merged with the cries of the present as the ultimate victory approached, a victory that would redefine the landscape of not only a city, but an entire continent. The ghosts of Berlin would linger, as the war-torn comrades, forever entwined by shared experiences, carried their stories into a fractured world rebuilding from ruins, encapsulating the relentless march of history, where the past inexorably shapes the future. As the grim march towards the heart of Berlin intensified, the Red Army deployed a combination of tenacious infantry tactics and unyielding armored support in a bid to outmaneuver the beleaguered German forces. The Berlin offensive was more than just a tactical engagement. It was a relentless assault on the very spirit of Nazi Germany. Each sector of the city bore witness to an evolution in the application of combined arms warfare, where infantry units, tank battalions, and artillery support had to coexist in a treacherous and deteriorating urban environment. Tanks, often deemed the titans of warfare, struggled to navigate the narrow streets and collapsed infrastructures, leading to a heightened dependency on infantry units to scout and secure paths through the rubble-filled avenues. The Soviets, adapting to the demands of urban combat, emphasized the importance of reconnaissance, employing small, agile groups to assess enemy positions before launching larger assaults. As the days wore on, zeroing in on the heart of the Reichstag, the Soviets realized the necessity of flexible and rapid decision-making. Commanders had to remain adaptable, altering battle plans in response to the dynamically evolving battlefield conditions. The fact that German troops were significantly outnumbered did not mitigate the ferocity of their resistance. They fought bravely, fortified by the remnants of zealotry, and driven by the looming specter of defeat looming over their homeland. The Wehrmacht troops, although stretched thin and suffering from supply shortages exacerbated by a devastated economy, undertook extensive fighting maneuvers, relying heavily on well-prepared defensive positions and utilizing their knowledge of the urban terrain to their advantage. Snipers scouted from the windows of shattered edifices, while machine gun nests were hastily constructed in basements and rubble piles, giving German forces formerly dense with manpower a fighting chance against overwhelming numbers. One of the defining features of this urban conflict was the necessity of psychological warfare. The Soviets understood that breaking morale was as crucial as breaching defenses. Leaflets raining from the sky delivered messages of hope, yet grounded in power, calling upon German soldiers to lay down their arms and throwing into question the futility of continued resistance. However, amid such psychological tactics, the impact on human lives was palpable. As troops advanced block by block, each neighborhood became a microcosm of desperation, where civilians, torn between fear and loyalty, had to navigate the treacherous waters of an uncertain fate. Many Berliners transformed their homes and streets into makeshift refuges, cultivating an atmosphere of communal survival amid the encroaching chaos. The sensation of being besieged settled like a heavy blanket over the city, suffocating but igniting a fierce will to endure. Logistics became a critical lifeline amid the assault. The Soviet supply lines stretched precariously while faced with the need to provide ammunition, food, and medical supplies to combat units engaged in visceral close-quarters combat. Each supply truck that dared traverse the crumbling streets faced the risk of enemy fire, and reports of destroyed convoys added an ominous weight to the already formidable challenge. However, the Soviets employed a philosophy of relentless perseverance. They embraced the notion that each lost truck could be replaced, but each wounded soldier represented hearts and dreams torn unimaginable distances apart. The efficient utilization of field hospitals, shuttling wounded soldiers from the front line to undamaged facilities, enhanced the efficacy of medical responses amidst the chaos. Medics, often themselves caught in the line of fire, took on the dual responsibility of life-saving, while also providing a comforting presence, counterbalancing the devastating effects of war. In the final days of the battle, the consequences of the Soviet tactics began to materialize in the form of urban carnage, reshaping the landscape of Berlin forever. Historical landmarks became mere husks of their vibrant past, stripped of their function and sentiments. Each battle waged inside houses, buildings, and streets contributed to the collective trauma of the city. The battleground shifted from an idea of a grand metropolis to a hellscape peppered with remnants of a civilization grappling with its own historical identity. Civilians were often caught in the crossfire, trapped in buildings, fleeing perilously through dwindling streets lined with armed soldiers. Their plight encompassed not only the immediate threat of violence, but the long-lasting aftermath of displacement and despair, compounding as the fighting drew closer to an end. The nearness of victory for the Soviets was juxtaposed with a confluence of suffering, as each fallen soldier was mirrored by countless civilian lives forever altered. In moments of fleeting calm between assaults, soldiers found solace in shared anecdotes while facing the abyss. Each comrade became a living testament to the resilience of humanity amidst the horror unfolding around them. They uttered words of encouragement and whispered tales from home, forging emotional connections that transcended unwavering hardship. These bonds, however temporary, served as lifelines in a sea of turmoil, reminding them of what was worth fighting for, what they hoped to go back to once the remnants of battle faded into memory. Yet, the unrelenting tide of warfare cast long shadows over the aspirations they carried in their hearts. As the final thrust toward the Reichstag unfolded, the urban battlefield acclimatized into a different form of combat, a brutal convergence of desperation and resolve both from the attackers and defenders. The skies above filled with the acrid smells of gunpowder and smoke, slicing through the fragile air with an ominous presence, foreshadowing the endgame of this harrowing chapter. Urban combat had created an unnaturally intimate warfare experience, where every room offered a micro-battlefield, demanding uncanny levels of tactical coordination and improvisation from the advancing Soviets. With tenacity unmatched, the Soviet soldiers forced their way through breakfast table confrontations turned disaster, reclaiming not just streets, but the soul of a city that amid destruction yearned to rebuild. Through this symphony of destruction and despair, the essence of war's brutality interwove with the fleeting glimmers of humanity, ultimately giving rise to reflections on the price of victory. In the unyielding conflict that raged within Berlin's battered confines, the unforgettable echoes emerged, impacted not just by the cacophony of war, but sculpted by the human experiences that were interlaced with every inch of contested space. Will you consider subscribing for more in-depth analyses of the formidable historical events that have shaped our understanding of conflict and its aftermath? And if you have suggestions for future topics, please share your thoughts with us. Your voice matters as we continue our exploration of history's most pivotal moments. As the Soviet soldiers advanced into Berlin, they faced mounting challenges that transcended simple military tactics. The very fabric of urban warfare demanded a re-evaluation of their strategic framework. The dense architecture of the city, known for its imposing buildings and narrow alleys, became a double-edged sword, providing potential cover for attackers while also presenting formidable obstacles. The initial phases of the assault displayed a calculated approach that emphasized the importance of utilizing combined arms, integrating infantry with support from artillery, tank units, and air power when possible. Each street, each crumbling structure, transformed into an arena where strategy met raw human will in a struggle not just for territory, but for survival itself. To execute these complex maneuvers, the Soviet commanders relied heavily on the experience and tenacity of their troops. Units frequently employed the tactic of fire and maneuver, creating suppressive fire to pin down German defenders before advancing. This tactic, while effective, came with significant risks. As soldiers moved from cover to cover, sniper fire from entrenched defenders often claimed unwary lives. The ruins of Berlin were littered with the remnants of fierce fighting, including vehicles burned to cinders and barricades hastily erected by desperate defenders. Combat became an ominous tango, with each side fighting for the initiative, engaging in a lethal rhythm dictated by opportunity and necessity. Amidst this chaos, bold commanders emerged, spearheading assaults into enemy positions where bolt-action weapons from weary German soldiers faced Soviet submachine guns and automatic rifles. The intense close-quarters conditions truly tested the mettle of the combatants as they engaged in often frenetic battles within the structure's confines. Here, rooms became makeshift bunkers, hallways turned into gauntlets, stairwells served as gallows, hand grenades and Molotov cocktails became the inundations of battlefield etiquette, intimate tools of desperation, wielded by soldiers who understood that in this arena, the margin between life and death was brutally narrow. The rapid pace of the fighting necessitated immediate logistical responses to supply the front lines with arms, ammunition, and medical support. Logistics in an urban battlefield posed unique challenges, as supply routes became exposed to enemy fire and the destruction of roads impeded movement. The Soviets established forward resupply depots rapidly, yet soldiers often improvised when supplies dwindled. Men constructed makeshift medical stations in courtyards, relying on scant resources, while others scavenged for weapons and gear in the wreckage of what once constituted the heart of Nazi Germany. Far beyond mere operational difficulties, the toll on human lives, both military and civilian, accentuated the grim stakes of the fight within the city. Civilians swept up in the turmoil found themselves serving as inadvertent soldiers, either fleeing for safety or, tragically, aiding resistance efforts in their neighborhoods under the duress of wartime terror. Their plight intertwined with that of the advancing Red Army units, and the fabric of the civilian experience during the Berlin offensive bore deep scars that would persist long after the final surrender. The Soviet troops, often clad in ragged winter uniforms, faced not only the ferocity of their German counterparts, but also the bitter reality of war's machinery. Starving for food, suffering casualties at alarming rates, and grappling with the shadows of previous battles etched into their very being, the soldiers pushed forward, motivated by a combination of ideology, survival instinct, and an innate desire for retribution against a regime that had wreaked havoc across their homeland. The German defenders, meanwhile, brimming with a resolve birthed from a decades-long ideology of nationalism, fought tenaciously, employing an array of fortified strongpoints, booby traps, and urban fortifications crafted during years of war preparation. They hoped to hold the line long enough to facilitate potential reinforcements from other beleaguered fronts. Tactical decisions made by commanders on both sides were crucial. German leaders often opted for a strategy of attrition, believing they could wear down the Soviet advance, even as the realization set in that resources were limited and morale was waning. Within a matter of days, the battle escalated into a fog of war, where tactical errors were punished severely. Streets previously claimed by Soviet forces became brutal front lines once again, continually shifting as house-to-house fighting led to shifting alliances of territory. Every window became a sniper's nest. Every corner turned represented a literal gamble of life and death, heightened by an ever-present fear of entertaining a false sense of security. It was in this tangible anxiety that the human experience of the soldiers crystallized, a mixture of terror, bravery, and disillusionment, inspiring acts of both heroism and despair amongst those trapped in the chaos. Communications became vital, as officers swiftly improvised signaling methods to ensure timely coordination amidst the din of battle noise. Officers were often heard yelling over the clamor, directing units into the fray, conveying heartfelt calls to courage against the backdrop of collapsing buildings. Unit cohesion became an indispensable factor in maintaining morale as nearby comrades fell, amplifying the sense of loss against the bewildering cadence of warfare. As the fighting raged on, the social landscape morphed dramatically. The notion of brotherhood emerged stronger among the soldiers. Tales of shared hardships, losses, and fleeting victories transformed individuals into a seamless brotherhood bound by shared experiences, suffering, and the unrelenting purpose to see the battle through to its bloody conclusion. Each inch gained amidst the wreckage was a testament to their resolve, though undoubtedly stained with sacrifices, both personal and collective, that would echo in their memories long after the last gun fell silent. Despite the sheer chaos of the street battles, it was precisely in these last desperate hours that the Soviet command seized upon the unfolding drama, seeking to wrest control of Berlin from the dying embers of Nazi influence. Tactical flexibility, emotional resilience, and the dire need for success propelled commanders to adapt lessons learned in battle. They finely calibrated attacks depending on scattered intelligence reports and the shifting tide of battlefield dynamics. The finality of these urban engagements underscored not just the ruthless mechanics of warfare, but the enormity of its human impact, finishing as both a story of victory and a haunting reflection on the cost of retribution amidst the ruins of a once great city. As the Soviet soldiers pushed deeper into Berlin's war-scarred streets, the first-hand experiences of these troops illuminated the unforgiving landscape of urban warfare. Buildings, now skeletal remains of what they once were, stood as mute witnesses to the devastation inflicted by years of conflict. The strategists at the Soviet High Command recognized that traditional battlefield tactics could not be applied in this densely populated urban environment. Instead, they sought to create an operational framework that underscored the importance of adaptability and surprise, a stark contrast to the rigid formations that had characterized more open battlefields. House-to-house fighting became the order of the day, a brutal necessity that transformed entire city blocks into frontline trenches where soldiers darted between cover, ambushing German forces entrenched in their last bastions of resistance. The streets of Berlin morphed into a labyrinth of strategic importance, with every window and doorway harboring an opportunity for advantage or disaster. In terms of tactical execution, the Red Army deployed shock troops, specially trained infantry units effectively utilizing formations that minimized vulnerability while maximizing firepower. The introduction of submachine guns and light machine guns enhanced close-quarters combat efficiency, allowing soldiers to carry a higher volume of ammunition over longer durations without the encumbrance of heavier artillery. Sniper units were positioned at strategic points, exploiting high ground for clear lines of sight that would allow them to purposely target German command and control elements, disrupting communication and sowing confusion among the defenders. Meanwhile, artillery units stationed just outside the city limits unleashed concentrated barrages to soften enemy fortifications before infantry advances, creating a crescendo of chaos that resonated through the very bones of Berlin. These tactics showcased a significant evolution of Soviet battlefield doctrine, emphasizing aggressive maneuvers over defensive positions, characteristics that would define the final stages of the conflict. However, the dynamic of street warfare presented its own unique set of challenges. Soviet commanders needed to ensure that their formations remained coherent amidst the tumult of urban fighting while balancing the necessity of speed with the ever-present threat of ambush. Flanking maneuvers became critical. Small units advanced while others provided covering fire from concealed positions, seeking to outmaneuver the German defenders who relied on interconnected strongpoints mapped within the urban area. The natural choke points and narrow streets reduced the effectiveness of larger mechanized units. Instead, battle maps were constantly revised to reflect the fluid nature of street-by-street confrontations. The Red Army's ability to capitalize on local knowledge, often conveyed through intelligence provided by German civilians who had either surrendered or were caught in the crossfire, served as another significant advantage for the advancing troops. In moments of respite, human connections forged a sense of shared urgency, motivating soldiers to press on against demoralized, yet fiercely determined German defenders. The civilians of Berlin found themselves caught in the midst of this relentless carnage. As the fighting intensified, the city became a makeshift refuge as well as a battleground, with many attempting to survive in basements and makeshift shelters. The specter of chaos gripped the populace, forcing individuals to confront the haunting question of survival. The human toll was immense. The sight of women and children suffering, clinging to the remnants of hope, penetrated the hardened hearts of soldiers who had borne witness to unfathomable horrors. Rations dwindled as the city endured prolonged shelling and sporadic gunfire. The basics of sustenance had become luxuries in this crumbling metropolis. In the midst of infantry skirmishes, moments arose where soldiers would find themselves forging fragile pacts with civilian populations, offering fleeting aids in the guise of humanity, a brief reprieve amid brutality. Yet, the relentless tide of Soviet soldiers pressed on, propelled by the war machine that was fueled not just by strategy and firepower, but also by a fervent ideological commitment to dismantle the remnants of Nazi tyranny. The atmosphere among the troops was charged, a combustible mixture of determination, aggression, and previously unimaginable brutality. Officers frequently found themselves confronting the psychological burden of command, overseeing relentless advances while grieving fallen comrades, pulling them from the rubble as the sound of gunfire and explosions echoed relentlessly in their ears. Each victory, however hard-fought, was followed by the sorrow of loss, an ever-present reminder of what was at stake. This dichotomy of humanity wrestled alongside the tactical calculus that each commander needed to address amidst the urban warfare theater. As cornered German units attempted to mount a defense, their tactics grew increasingly desperate. Panzerfaust teams employed guerrilla-style techniques aimed at harassing Soviet advances, firing from concealed locations to bring chaos to the advancing forces. Additionally, fortified positions in buildings encouraged fierce resistance as German soldiers used any advantage afforded by familiar terrain to their benefit. The urban combat meant that friendly fire incidents became a troubling reality. One wrong step could lead to severe consequences. The close-quarters nature of the fighting resulted in intense scrutiny of unit communications. Situational awareness was paramount as enemy combatants blended seamlessly into the civilian population, a constant reminder that every encounter could turn lethal at the slightest misstep. As the confrontation escalated, the final assault on the heart of Berlin drew ever closer. The methods employed by Soviet command began to reflect not only tactical necessity, but also a deeply embedded ideology born from years of conflict. Each capture of territory was celebrated, but the toll exacted upon human lives, both combatants and civilians, forced troops to ponder the price of their victories. They advanced through a city now imbued with the visceral stench of war, treasuring fleeting moments of camaraderie within their ranks, even as the streets became blood-soaked sepulchres, where stories of sacrifice unfolded. In those poignant exchanges, soldiers clung to hope. They understood that this final battle, while propelled by the gears of a great conflict, also bore witness to their humanity amidst a relentless tide of destruction. Ultimately, the determination of Soviet soldiers, tethered to tactical innovation and strategic execution, carved a path toward securing victory in the ruins of Berlin. Yet this came at a price, a harrowing endurance test revealing the fragility of human life against the backdrop of an everlasting war machine, imprinted in the stone and steel of a besieged city. The poignant interplay of strategy and sacrifice bore witness to an essential truth. Even in the throes of war, the human experience is laced with both heroism and tragedy, each battle a testament to resilience in the face of unimaginable darkness. As the Soviet forces drew ever closer to the core of Berlin, the combat landscape transformed into an intricate tableau of destruction, marked by the remnants of civilization. Buildings that once stood proud were reduced to skeletal shells, offering minimal cover and limited strategic options for both the attackers and defenders. With every inch gained, the Soviet commanders faced the daunting task of coordinating their troops in an environment that seemed to shift with each passing minute. They had to adapt their tactics to not only neutralize the entrenched German positions, but also to navigate the perilous complexities of urban warfare that had emerged as one of the defining characteristics of the battle. The Red Army's strategy relied heavily on overwhelming firepower, supported by the sheer numbers that characterized the Soviet military machine. Artillery units and tank brigades played a pivotal role in this onslaught, with barrage after barrage targeting fortified German strongholds nestled within the city's neighborhoods. However, as the architecture of Berlin became more complex, the high-velocity shells often fell into a quagmire of unintended consequences. The lethal projectiles would sometimes obliterate a single target at a great cost. Nearby civilian structures, along with the lives that thrived within them, were also caught in the crossfire. The obliteration of entire blocks not only showcased the indiscriminate nature of heavy artillery, but served as a stark reminder of the duality of the war. While one side sought liberation, its methods echoed with the weight of devastation. Soviet commanders meticulously calculated the balance between maintaining pressure on enemy forces while attempting to mitigate further civilian casualties, a near impossible task as the relentless advance continued. On the ground, the infantry experienced a different type of warfare, marked by brutal hand-to-hand engagements, characterized by a fierce determination to assert control over specific buildings, street corners, and critical transit points. Units of mechanized infantry moved in tandem with tanks, often facing the harrowing threat of street ambushes. The German defenders, comprised of seasoned troops and devoted volunteers, utilized their intimate knowledge of the cityscape to lay traps. They would occupy attics, cellars, and basements, launching surprise attacks against the advancing Soviet columns that threatened to make attention-grabbing gains with their overwhelming numbers. Soviet soldiers quickly learned the harsh realities of urban combat, where every corner held uncertainty, and the desire for glory could end with the fatal discharge of a rifle hidden within the tangled rubble of their once familiar surroundings. Tactical innovation became a necessity as combat evolved. Smaller combat groups maneuvering through the ruins became the norm. Soviet commanders encouraged a practice known as shock troops, specialized units that advanced under a barrage of suppression fire, while others exploited the sudden emotional upheaval of the adversary. These squads relied on rapid mobility, moving quickly from position to position, breaching strongholds, and inflicting decisive blows on the German defenses as they attempted to destabilize their command structure. However, the high-density tactics had their drawbacks. Unit cohesion suffered, creating a volatile situation where miscommunication could lead to tactical blunders and increased casualties. As fear and chaos compounded, soldiers began to form uncertain alliances, creating a fragile bond bred in the crucible of mutual survival. The troopers, empowered by fervor, but battered by the traumatic conditions of the battle, found solace in fleeting acts of humanity. Amidst the din of gunfire and the acrid smell of burning debris, camaraderie blossomed on the ruins of the city. Soldiers exchanged stories of home and laughter, rekindling memories of lives untouched by the ravages of war as they secured each hard-won building. But as the order to storm a particularly fortified sector known as the Friedrichstrasse subway tunnel came through, the mood shifted. The order symbolized not merely a tactical maneuver, but a psychological assault meant to shake the already weakened resolve of the German forces. The descent into the subterranean was fraught with danger, as soldiers faced disorienting darkness, navigating claustrophobic passages where fear stalked them at every corner. With men piling onto one another and the echoes of gunfire reverberating through the tunnels, anxiety morphed into a palpable force. The initial excitement of the charge soon vaporized. It devolved into a frantic struggle for survival. The darkness disrupted the cohesion within the units. Where once shouted orders sliced through the noise, confusion reigned as they confronted not just the enemy, but the visceral dread of dislocation in so confining a space. The feeble flickers of their flashlights illuminated walls smeared with the makings of a chaotic retreat. This battle, a metaphor mirrored in grand terms of their lives, ensued long after the dust settled. The aftermath exposed not just physical ruins, but stripped bare souls grappling with the unyielding truth of war, its capacity to devastate and dehumanize. A pivotal encounter unfolded near the iconic Reichstag building, where the Soviet forces finally decided to lay siege to one of Berlin's most emblematic structures. As columns of infantry surged forward, they faced an unprecedented onslaught. Tactical priorities aligned as armored divisions attempted to create a perimeter, while infantrymen converged from various approaches, turning the assault into a frenzied charge. Gunfire erupted in waves, and smoke clouded the air, infusing the atmosphere with both dread and indelible purpose. The constricting space seemed to diminish both time and perspective, raising the question of victory amid chaos. As Soviet forces clashed against a desperate enemy resolved to defend every inch, the confrontation unfolded in an unpredictable dance of firepower and human emotion that tested the limits of both sides. Soviet officers, steeped in a rich history of collective trauma and communist ideology, bore witness to the consequences of their choices. As they issued commands, the human cost echoed louder with each passing moment, and the results of their strategies became starkly apparent. The buildings marked by their units' flags soon transformed from symbols of triumph to monuments of anguish, all resource spent regarded as a cost in flesh and spirit. These battles illustrated not merely the defeat of an adversary, but the fracturing of ideals, leaving ghostly shadows imprinted in the memories of those that survived. By the end of those feverish days, as the Soviet forces took control of Berlin, the toll of conflict became an indelible scar on the human psyche. Each tactical nuance and decision reflected a powerful interplay between political motives, military command, and the raw pulse of humanity echoing through every street, building, and urban theater. Victory came with the weight of despair, as the liberated city sprawled across the horizon like an unfinished story of resilience amidst profound loss, revealing the duality of hope and tragedy written into its battered framework. In that chaos, as ferocity contorted the landscape into a merciless battleground, the haunting realization settled deep into the hearts of the victors. War reshapes reality, distorts lives, and yet, through the wreckage, the human spirit fights on, fueled by an unwavering hope for a future unfettered from the ghosts of the past. As the cacophony of battle raged in the heart of Berlin, the Soviet forces, emboldened by ideological fervor and tactical rigidity, began to adapt to the chaos that enveloped them. They understood that urban combat was a unique beast, one that morphed the principles of warfare into a complex interplay of close-quarters engagements. The crumbling buildings became more than mere obstacles. They morphed into fortresses, and every doorway could lead to ambush. The street-to-street battles demanded not only individual bravery, but also an acutely coordinated strategy, marked by a dynamic shifting of units and resources, to reclaim the capital, already battered and bruised from years of war. Soviet commanders, analyzing the battlefield with heightened urgency, employed a fusion of strategy including encirclement, direct fire support, and combined arms operations to break the resolute German defense. The Soviet infantry, equipped with PPSH-41 submachine guns, advanced under the cover of artillery barrages that rumbled ominously overhead, shaking the very ground upon which they fought. Artillery, including Katyusha rocket launchers, unleashed a wrathful deluge, illuminating the sky with streaks of fire as they struck with devastating precision on fortified positions. When the ground shook in response to shell fire, the deafening blasts marked the beginning of every charge, as soldiers sprinted forward, emboldened by the conviction of advancing towards final victory, but burdened by the fear of immediate reprisal. Coordination among units became paramount. The chaos of urban warfare often led to a breakdown of communication and structure, situations where a missed command could result in catastrophic losses. The Soviets utilized the effectiveness of mechanized units, deploying T-34 tanks strategically along crucial avenues, while using infantry to clear rooftops and block houses, capable of outflanking stubborn defenders entrenched within the fortified districts of Berlin. The tank commanders, aware of the need for disciplined advances, fostered a tight-knit relationship with their accompanying infantry, exchanging coded signals to navigate effectively through the destruction left in the wake of previous combat engagements. As Soviet troops surged forward, they encountered a fierce German resistance, who defended their homeland with an unyielding ferocity, driven not only by the will to protect their city, but also by desperation, as they witnessed the impending collapse of their vision for a greater Reich. German soldiers, though running low on supplies, were motivated by a mixture of nationalism, fear, and misplaced loyalty to their commanders. With barricades erected and snipers poised in strategic locations, urban warfare compelled both sides to blur the lines between military strategy and sheer survival instinct. The Germans relied on individual sniper kill zones, creating deadly traps that would decimate advancing Soviet ranks while still considerably outnumbered. As rifles responded with bark and echo, the human cost became starkly visible, manifesting itself in a tragic tapestry of loss and grief. Each fallen soldier marked a momentous sacrifice, a loss felt deeply throughout both the Soviet regiments and the German defenders alike, who painted the streets red with the blood of their comrades. The haunting whispers of those lost echoed in hushed tones, fueling both sides with a potent mixture of vengeance and despair. In the chaos, many soldiers were confronted with the psychological scars of conflict, witnessing firsthand the brutal realities of war that would last long after the echoes of gunfire faded. The mental fortitude of troops was tested to its limits, as glimpses of comrades, young and old alike, succumbed to the onslaught of violence, became the grim reminder of a harsh reality that both sides grappled with but understood differently. The fences that once delineated neighborhoods became barriers between life and death, as houses lit from within became tombs for the unwilling. The architecture of culture and society was transformed into a landscape of desolation and withering humanity. As crimson shadows lengthened across Berlin, the iconic German architecture became a witness to the clash of ideologies, leaving scorched insignia upon its very facade. The heart of the city, once throbbing with life and innovation, now pulsed only with despair, as structures once vibrant with family offerings now bore semblances of mausoleums that housed unspeakable tragedies. Amid this chaos, the critical role of logistics emerged more prominently than ever. Supply lines, intricate conduits of necessity, dictated the fortunes of war. With advancing troops, the need for ammunition, medical supplies, and food became glaringly urgent. The Soviets were tasked with coherent tactical management of their war machine, constantly recalibrating to meet the demands of their now empowered forces on the ground. As the battle raged through days and hours, the aerial support provided by the Soviet Air Force became increasingly vital. Bombers carved paths above the embattled city, delivering payloads that shattered the plucky German resilience, while offering critical surveillance and reports from the aerial view, allowing ground commanders to recalibrate their responses in real time. As the battle evolved into a quintessential display of urban warfare, the emotional toll became an inseparable aspect of the environment. Civilian voices, muffled by the chaos outside, echoed within the ruins of what was once a thriving neighborhood. Families fractured, homes obliterated, and dreams dispersed into the maelstrom of violence. Those who remained, trapped by fate, bore witness to this human tragedy playing out in real time. Ordinary citizens caught in an extraordinary conflict, often becoming incidental players in an unfolding scenario far beyond their control. For these individuals, survival overshadowed ideology, as they witnessed the demonization of their world by two warring factions, each single-minded in their approach to victory. As the tumultuous waves of conflict pressed on, the final throes of violence began to symbolize a tipping point. The unyielding German defenses wore down, collapsing under the relentless force of overwhelming numbers and tactical ingenuity. Amid the crumbling of fortress-like structures, both sides began to grapple with the reality that this urban war was morphing from a strategic confrontation into a humanitarian disaster, a visceral reflection of their values driven home by the harrowing specter of loss that accompanied each tactical maneuver. Gradually, the rubble created by the waves of urban warfare painted a poignant and tragic portrait of the human cost. Families shattered, landmarks obliterated, and a city steeped in cultural heritage now reduced to mere memories clouded in smoke and despair. As the walls of Berlin bore witness to monumental struggle, they stood as a testament to the fraught and tangled narrative that defined not only a battle, but the very essence of the human experience. The resilience cast in tragedy, the complexity of choices made amidst chaos, and the enduring spirit of a people forever altered by the winds of war. As the ferocity of the conflict escalated within the concrete canyons of Berlin, the Soviet High Command was acutely aware of the urgent need for tactical innovation. The traditional maneuvers that had been effective in previous campaigns had to be abandoned in favor of adaptive strategies that catered to the complexities of urban combat. The brooding architecture of Berlin was riddled with fortifications, each corner housing German snipers and well-camouflaged machine gun nests, creating a veritable labyrinth of death for any advancing soldier. The Soviets, having experienced the brutal lessons of Stalingrad and other previous engagements, understood that close combat would dominate the scene, turning each block into a microcosm of warfare, driven by initiative, brutality, and calculated chaos. To counter the entrenched German positions, the Soviet forces employed combined arms tactics, integrating infantry, armor, and artillery into a cohesive and responsive fighting force. The storm troops, or shock troops as they were known, became pivotal in this fight. Elite infantry units were provided with submachine guns and harnessed to create a rapid assault force that could exploit breaks in enemy lines with eerie precision. Their advancement was often preceded by barrages of artillery aimed not just at killing, but at disorienting and demoralizing the defenders. The sheer volume of firepower unleashed upon neighborhoods that had previously held familial warmth transformed the streets into asphyxiating terrains, where survival became a mere gamble amid the din of explosions and shrapnel. Among the unique armaments employed by Soviet commanders was the use of the infamous T-34 tanks. Entering into the city's claustrophobic layout, these machines, while effective, faced significant challenges. The narrow streets and alleys constricted their movement and rendered them vulnerable to ambushes launched by German Panzerfausts and other anti-tank personnel at close range. Throughout these battles, crews faced the clash of the mechanical and the human. While their steel machines offered protection, they also bore witness to the harrowing loss sustained by infantry comrades advancing in tandem. The sound of each ignition and rumble evoked brazen determination, matched only by the dread weighing on crews anticipating the finality of combat. Moreover, the psychological warfare endured by the Soviet soldiers catalyzed a depth of human drama that turned each engagement into a tale of existential survival. For many frontline fighters, each room cleared, every corner turned, was laden with the unshakable burden of loss. You can make your way through 24 buildings, only to realize you may be the last of your squad left alive. The sporadic bursts of gunfire and fragmented screams of the wounded resonated deeply within the collective psyche of the troops, shaping their resolve and often leading to a grim nihilism that permeated their ranks. For each victory on the battlefield, there was a commensurate cost: friends lost, promising young lives extinguished, and the trauma of what they witnessed eroded the very fabric of their humanity. Despite the chaos, moments of sublime human connection sparked through the haze. The commitment of medics who pushed through dangerous crossfire to tend to the wounded, often disregarding their safety, provided glimpses of hope amidst despair. Their actions spoke volumes of valor, igniting motivation within their comrades to continue pressing forward despite the ever-present specter of death. Each triage was paired with fervent prayers, and while tensions flared among soldiers caught between instinctive self-preservation and the duty to assist their fellows, the heart-tearing choice to advance to save a friend often led to lifetimes of haunting memories. As days turned into nights amidst the glare of blazing buildings, it became painfully evident that logistics would prove just as influential as determination. Supply chains struggled under the weight of the city's destruction, and the disarray resulted in intermittent shortages of ammunition, food, and medical supplies that exacerbated the ferocity of the violence. The Soviet forces had, by this time, lost their overwhelming numbers as personal losses mounted, mandating tactical withdrawals to regroup, replenish, and reassess their immediate combat capabilities. The ruination of Berlin tore at the fabric of the operation, with each halted advance manifesting profound frustration creeping in among the ranks. Yet, leadership adapted, emphasizing reconnaissance missions for intelligence gathering rather than outright assault, a shift illustrating an acknowledgement of the city's complex nature and the eventual need for sustained securing operations amidst rubble-strewn streets. The German forces, while beleaguered, were still imbued with fierce nationalist zeal, prepared to die for every inch of ground. They had fought with desperation, bolstered by an abiding belief that defeat meant total annihilation. As their artillery roared, they countered the Soviets with a series of vicious counterattacks. SS units and loyalist Wehrmacht soldiers exhibited strategic cunning, often employing well-placed ambushes that capitalized on terrain advantages. The psychological warfare raged alongside conventional combat. German propaganda fed into the desperation among their ranks, urging a stand against the Bolshevik horde, igniting flames of fascism to inspire bravery from the depths of despair. Amidst the shifting tides, the battle for Berlin encapsulated the juxtaposition between victory and survival, the urge toward destruction laced with an ever-present sense of humanity. As the smoke thickened and the ruins began to envelop the city, the soldiers of the Soviet Union forged ahead, buoyed by an unquenchable ambition to conclude the war and liberate what remained of Europe from the claws of tyranny. The resilience of the soldiers, set against the tangibles of destruction, illustrated warfare's relentless advance into every crevice of life, leaving echoes of suffering that rang long after the smoke cleared. While entire neighborhoods were laid to waste, and streets bloated with debris bore testimony to a fervent struggle, the intrinsic humanity clung to the edges of the battlefield amidst the carnage. Battles fought within bricks and mortars symbolized much more than territorial gain. They were fights to reclaim souls, ideologies, and ultimately the essence of inalienable rights, freedom from oppression. As the Red Army continued its push deeper into Berlin's heart, the psychological weight of loss and the unyielding drive for vengeance intertwined, showcasing a cataclysm that transcended tactical boundaries, becoming a battlefield where strategy and human fragility converged.